message from Specialty Coffee Home here today, and I'm going to be talking about how to make one of the simplest type of filter coffees you can do at home using an Aeropress, which is one of these. They're available for about £20 online, and you'll need a grinder as well. In this case we've got an EK43, but any decent-ish home grinder will give you a reasonable coffee. What we're using here is a light roast Kelowna coffee. Light roast coffees give a better flavour with filter coffees. You get more of the fruity flavours that you'd expect to get in a specialty coffee shop. What we're going to do first of all is we're going to weigh out the coffee. In this case we're looking for around 15 grams of beans with your home grinder. We use slightly less with the EK43 for reasons I won't go into now. In terms of the grind, we're looking for something between what you'd maybe use for a pour over coffee and what you use for an espresso. So go fairly fine. To give you an idea, we grind for espresso on this EK43 at about 1.3 to 1.6 on the dial. I'm going to grind at 2.2 for this coffee, so it's not actually much coarser than for espresso. So we've got our 15 odd grams of coffee there. We're going to grind that. While we're doing that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the bottom part of my Aeropress. I'm going to soak it in some hot water in this jug here. Now the reason for doing that is that over time the rubber doesn't expand as much as it used to when the two parts fit together and you end up with a bit of leakages from it. So if you dip it in some hot water first, it will ensure that you get a good seal there when you put it on. Okay, so we ground our coffee and we've got it in here. I'm going to make sure I've got the right weight there. So yeah. Okay, I'm going to tip out a bit there to give you an example of how fine the grind is. It's actually not much coarser than espresso. It's a pretty fine grind, and the reason we go for a fine grind is most grinders produce a more uniform grind at the finer end of the spectrum, which means you'll get a more even extraction on your coffee. Okay, the next step is to put your Aeropress together. So we've soaked this top rubber bump and we're going to fit it together like this. Now it should be a fairly tight squeeze, and push it down about 1 centimetre, I guess, to make sure that you don't get any leakages there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use this not in the way that the instructions for the Aeropress tell you to use it. We're going to use it inverted. The reason we're going to do this is because it means that you don't end up with coffee coming out of the bottom of the Aeropress when you've got it this way up through the filter before it's properly extracted. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put that together and put it on the scales, and we're going to zero our scales. So that means we can then weigh in the coffee. So I'm going to put the coffee in now. A little bit more. Okay, just tap it a bit more. And then I'm going to zero the scales again. Okay, if we give that a little shake to even out the coffee bed there, what we need to do next is fill our kettle. Now, I've got this machine set up to about 94 degrees for the water to come out. 94 degrees is sort of one of the optimum temperatures for coffee. You can go a little bit cooler, you can go a little bit hotter. For home use, what I recommend using is just off the boil water, and just try to be consistent with it. So boil your kettle and then leave it for about 15 seconds and then pour it straight from the boil 15 seconds later. The reason for that is mainly consistency. The important thing about coffee is your consistency. If you're not consistent with your temperature, with your amount of coffee, with your amount of water, then you're never going to be able to get anywhere, because each time you'll be chasing your own tail trying to find what the differences are if you're not keeping everything the same. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour 200 odd grams of water in here. So those of you who are familiar with extractions will know that that is around 15 grams per litre. Now next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to start my timer now. So we're looking for 1 minute 30 on this coffee. Generally that's what your time is going to be on fairly light roast coffees. The lighter the roast, the longer the time you want to take, because they're a little bit harder to extract. If it's slightly darker, you may want to take a bit less time. Now, we're using a metal filter here in the bottom of this. Most people use a paper filter, which is what comes with the Aeropress. Wet the filter before you do this next stage. Obviously we don't need to because it's metal. That's to just get rid of any papery taste, which you definitely don't want. Okay, stick that on, twist it and make sure it's completely tight there. And then if you pull it down until you just start to see the liquid coming through there. Now leave it. Okay, you've got to leave it for your 1 minute 50. When that moment is up, which should be in about another 30 seconds or so, you'll see that we have to take the next stage. If you need some sort of jug, you can use something like this, a milk steaming jug that you don't use for milk, because obviously the milk will contaminate the flavour even if it's been washed. So you don't really want something that you've been used for milk. That's why we use these Teflon ones to indicate that it's not a steaming jug. Or you can use something like this, a little Hario jug here. Just make sure it's got enough space to fit onto the top there. Okay, we're going to use this one here, and we're going to take it off. We're going to put the jug on top. This is where you need to be careful. You've got to turn it over very quickly, making sure you don't cover yourself in nearly boiling water. And now we're looking for 30 seconds of constant pressure. So what you want to do now is you're pushing the coffee out. Now if you go too hard or too soft, or you change your the pressure that you push from one to another, then you're not going to get consistency again. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to time it so that it always takes us around 30 seconds to push all the coffee out. If it's really, really hard, you've maybe ground a little bit too fine. So keep pushing, keep pushing, keep pushing. And when you get to the bottom, you want to stop at the point where you hear a sort of hissing noise, because that's when you'll be extracting some of the oils out of the coffee that you don't necessarily want at the very end. You can also end up pushing some of the particles into your coffee, which gives it a bit of a less than clean taste. So we're almost down to the last quarter here. Keep the pressure pretty constant, and then you'll find that you get a very nice clean tasting coffee. It's not something that goes well with milk. These very light roast filter coffees are not really designed to have milk in them. You can put milk in them, but you'll lose a lot of those subtle flavours, and you'll end up with something that tastes okay, but could have been any coffee really. Whereas if you drink them black, you'll find that they've got an awful lot of flavour. But you want to let them cool first. So if we stick this on one side, I'm going to pour it into this jug here to help it cool a little bit and make it look nicer. So there you have it. And then if you give it a few minutes to cool before you drink it, you'll find that you're able to taste those subtle flavours, that fruity acidity, and the complexity of a great filter coffee. So once it's cooled to about 55 degrees, so if you give it about three or 4 minutes before you start to drink it, then you'll find you've got a great coffee there. Proof is always in the tasting. What we're looking for here in this coffee, to check that we've got the right sort of grind, is a fairly light-bodied flavour to it, because we're using about 15 grams of coffee, 60 grams per litre. It's not going to be a really, really strong coffee. But what we're looking for is something that's got lots of flavour, lots of sweetness, so let's try it. Okay, so it's got a lovely fruitiness, sort of black currant, real sweetness to it, some sort of demerara sugar in there. My advice on the grinding, if this is tasting really, really acidic, so it's got that kind of taste of a very acidic citrus fruit, then you've probably gone a bit too coarse on the grind, and it's under extracted. So if it's a bit acidic and it's not got that much flavour to it, apart from that acidity, just grind a bit finer. Conversely, if you get that bitter taste, a bit like you get, let's say, very, very, very dark chocolate, and the flavour sort of disappears from your mouth and it's a bit too rich, then you've probably gone a bit too fine and you've over-extracted it. Now, the better grinder you have, the more you can extract without it tasting over-extracted. So we can go for a much higher extraction with the EK43 because it's a really good grinder, especially for filter coffee. If we're using maybe a home grinder, like something like a Baratza Encore or a hand grinder even, you're probably going to have to grind a bit coarser than this, because it's not as uniform with its particle distribution. which means that the coffee's going to taste a bit more over-extracted when you grind really fine, and it's going to taste a bit more bitter. So basically keep all of your variables the same, apart from the grind. Just change the grind. Don't start messing around with the weight of coffee going in, the weight of the water going in, what temperature of water you're using. Keep that all the same, and just alter your grind. If it's tasting acidic, go finer. If it's tasting bitter, go a little bit coarser. And once you find the final best tasting coffee out of those, keep that setting, record it, and then you can use it.